Greg Bagwell is a retired deputy commander at the Royal Air Force Air Command. Welcome to our program, Mr. Bagwell.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Ukraine has fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles in the Kursk region for the first time, eliminating dozens of Russian and North Korean officers. Meanwhile, Russia has fired intercontinental ballistic missile on Ukraine for the first time. Don't you think that the war in Ukraine has reached another turning point?
Well, it certainly feels like that. I don't know how it feels in Ukraine, but it's having a little bit of an impact outside Ukraine, because obviously there are people concerned about escalation, which has been the case for a few years. My personal view is we should have allowed you to use those missiles a long time ago. So we are at a situation that we are, but we probably should have been there a while back.
Also, Russia has fired intercontinental ballistic missile on Dnipro. Putin confirmed, and he said that Kremlin Russian forces have fired medium-range experimental ballistic missile. Is NATO capable of intercepting such missile? And don't you think that this could be a threat to the West?
There are systems that can intercept that type of a weapon. There's a system called the THAAD in the United States, and the Israelis make a system called Arrow 3, which is both are capable of attacking ballistic missiles. We also have some maritime-based systems that also are capable of that. So, yes, but the problem is, of course, how do you defend an entire continent? And that will be the challenge. But of course, the real threat here is Putin using these missiles in the first instance. And so there's some real hard questions here to talk about escalation and deterrence. If you start firing ballistic missiles at continents, it's kind of hard to work out whether those are conventional or nuclear. And Putin is playing a very, very dangerous game here. And he needs to be told in no uncertain terms that this is not to be tolerated.
Is the West ready to retaliate in case of direct attack of Russian forces on NATO? Because Vladimir Putin threatened a direct attack on NATO countries, on those countries which missiles are being used to attack Russia, the United States, the United Kingdom and France. He said this in his recent TV address to the nation. He said that Russia has the right to attack members of NATO which are supporting Ukraine while providing long-range missiles to attack Russia. What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's part of Putin's playbook, so we shouldn't be surprised by what he's doing. There is absolutely no comparison or any proportion between the use of a tactical conventional weapon like ATACMS or Storm Shadow and the weapon that he fired at Dnipro. So any idea here that one thing is similar to the other is complete rubbish. Putin knows that. And in many ways, his messaging isn't for Ukraine. His messaging is for NATO. And it creates an element of fear amongst some people because they are concerned about what it might mean. You've got a situation in America as we see a transition of the administration where we have a lot of people talking about the idea of World War III and that this is the early signs. I think all of that is scaremongering, and I think that's exactly what Putin's trying to achieve with this. He knows that an attack like that, or even a minor attack on NATO, will get an immediate response under Article 5 of the NATO Charter. So he needs to be very, very careful here about what he's trying to achieve, because he's going to make this situation worse. But he's going to make it a lot worse for Russia more than he is for NATO.
Do you believe that recent Putin threats on direct attack on NATO could force Western leaders to reverse their decision on long-range strikes on Russia?
I hope not, and I believe not. I think there's enough resolve that shouldn't happen. But there are going to be the odd voice that is going to try and make that the case. And I think the key here is for NATO to be absolutely determined, absolutely strong behind Ukraine and behind Article 5, and make it crystal clear that there is no gap between what we say we will do and what we will actually do. And of course, Putin is a sneaky character. He probably realizes that to do that type of a direct military attack is going to get a response that he doesn't want. And I think we need to keep a very close eye on the other types of activity, whether that's attacks on DHL sites. We obviously saw that aircraft just today in Lithuania, a DHL aircraft. It'll be extremely interesting to see what has happened there. And we've also seen internet cables in the Baltic being attacked. So there are other things that Putin may try to do or choose to do that he will do in order to ratchet up the threat here, to try and create a divide between certain nations. So we need to be strong. We need to be strong as NATO. We need to be strong behind Ukraine.
What are the risks of Russia using nuclear weapons in Ukraine? Because there have been many threats about the possible nuclear response. Also, Russia has fired on Dnipro such a missile which is capable of also having nuclear warhead, which is capable of having nuclear warhead inside those missiles. What is your analysis of this?
Yeah, and that's the line that Putin will try and push. But as an experimental weapon, that is not a nuclearized missile. So he have to do something to even bring that into service. I can assure the people of Ukraine that NATO, particularly America and the UK, but the majority of NATO, are observing Russian nuclear signals constantly, whether things are being moved from storage, whether certain communications are being made between various sites. We will know when things are beginning to move. And if you remember, it probably didn't make the news that much. Russia pre-warned America of that firing, only by a few minutes, but it pre-warned. And the reason it pre-warns is it knows that America will detect a ballistic missile being fired. We have satellites in the air that can see these incidents happen in real time. Putin does not want the West miscalculating a ballistic missile attack as a potential nuclear attack because he knows what will come back at him. So Putin will be very, very careful here to not send nuclear signals other than what he does in the newspapers and on TV. Because we will watch him and we will see them. So there's a big difference here between the reality and the rhetoric. Big difference.
There are lots of discussions inside Ukraine on how could Western allies respond in case of a nuclear attack from Russia if the West detects a nuclear launch of a nuclear missile on Ukraine or other country. Will the West be ready to intercept this missile or at least strike back before this missile reaches Ukraine?
Yeah, most Western governments make it a policy of not discussing how they may or may not come to decisions on nuclear weapons. We have nuclear weapons ready right now. They are aimed at targets in Russia. And if Russia chooses to use nuclear weapons against the West, then it knows what's coming back. That is the whole point of nuclear deterrence. Obviously, an attack on Ukraine is a slightly different matter, but I'm assuring you that we will not treat the use of nuclear weapons on the continent of Europe lightly. And Russia will be being told that privately behind closed doors. I can assure you of that.
Do you expect any kind of conventional response in case of Russia's in case of Russia using nuclear weapons against Ukraine?
I mean, I think the increase in conventional support for Ukraine is key here. It always has been key. And in my view, we've been too slow and too timid in some of the things we have passed across to you or in terms of the permissions used. So one of the ways to continue to counter Russian rhetoric is to continue to increase the permissions and the number of weapons that we supply from the West. And my belief is we should be doing that, if anything, more than we have in the past. And so that will be the response for now. And the idea that Putin is then going to try and counter that by more ballistic missile strikes is for the birds. Putin will try doing other things probably, some of the things that are a little bit more underhand. But continues to support conventionally is the answer in this case.
Do you expect Vladimir Putin to continue his strikes on Ukraine with such medium-range ballistic missiles or even intercontinental one? And does this make any sense from a military point of view?
It is not a military tactic. Of that, there is no doubt. This is purely scaremongering. And it's it's predominantly aimed outside Ukraine. I know it's the people of Ukraine that are suffering, but it's aimed at Western governments. It's aimed at the heart of the American transition of government. And this is why it's so important that the Trump administration doesn't play games between now and the 20th of January, makes clear, unequivocal statements of its support for Ukraine. And that will then stop Putin in his tracks. What we cannot do here is allow a sort of misunderstandings or a lack of clarity to allow Putin to try and create divides. That is what he's trying to do.
I would like also to cover with you Ukraine's strikes deep inside Russia. Do you think that this decision of the United States, UK and France to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia can change the course of this war in Ukraine's favor? And Ukraine also has been provided with some F-16 jets. And do you feel that all these decisions are enough for Ukraine to prevail in this war?
I think that's very difficult to really make a call on. I'm afraid that my honest appraisal is this is a little bit too little and a little bit too late. I would have wanted to see the F-16s or other aircraft arrive 2 years ago. We should have given permissions for strikes in self-defense on Russian soil from the very beginning. Russia has moved a lot of the targets further away from the border. So some of those logistic sites, some of those hubs, communication hubs, headquarters have been moved to be further away in terms of range. So we've given him too long to prepare for this. However, these will make a difference. And I think we saw on that strike just a few days ago that hit that what appears to be an underground command and control network. That will have an impact. And I think as winter now comes to bear, and hopefully we can see the battlefield become a little bit more static because of the weather, that actually the impact now will make a difference on how much progress they can make over the coming months. And then hopefully we will find ourselves in the spring of next year in a better place than we were if we can continue those attacks and continue supplying those types of weapons. So we can turn the tide. I just wish we'd done it sooner.
Why Russia is so vulnerable to ATACMS missiles and Storm Shadow? Why does Russia fail to intercept such air threats? Because of the territory of Russian Federation, so big territory that they cannot close the skies with anti-aircraft system. And what is the reason of that?
Well, the simple reason is they aren't as good at shooting things down as they said they were. So the S-300, S-400 systems are not 100% fail-proof. Ukraine has been flying relatively slow, relatively vulnerable drones deep into Russia and not being intercepted. So we know that the system is, you can penetrate it. ATACMS and Storm Shadows and the like travel faster. They fly lower. They're able to route around systems, and they have a number of techniques that they can employ, and I won't discuss them here, that make them even harder to shoot down. Russia will continue to claim that they've shot them down, but I think we are beginning to see the truth. And whilst they may shoot the odd one down, enough will get through. The big difference with ATACMS and Storm Shadows is, unlike a relatively cheap drone, these have systems that can penetrate meters of concrete and earth and can get into targets that normally you wouldn't be able to get to. So if Russia thinks there's a hiding place from these weapons, it's beginning to find out that there isn't one.
Could you please also specify and outline the main effects which could be reached, which could be done by ATACMS and Storm Shadow strikes deep inside Russia, and how do you see the short and long-term effects of these weapons, of this new Ukraine strikes inside Russia?
Well, firstly, they're highly accurate. I mean, these systems will be able to strike within a meter or two of its target. And when we have seen evidence of Storm Shadow where if you fire two weapons at the same point, the second weapon goes through the hole that the first one made. They are that accurate. Also, they have the ability to penetrate hardened targets. So if you have a bunker, if you have a hardened system, they will go through reinforced concrete of numbers of meters, and they will even penetrate through floors of buildings deep underground. So if you know you've got a site that's trying to stay hidden and trying to stay hardened, these systems will take those targets out. So they are really, really good for taking out precise targets that probably protect some of their most sensitive information and some of their most sensitive people.
What is your assessment also of the German-made Taurus cruise missiles? There are lots of discussions about the possibility of Germany providing Ukraine with such missiles, but are there more, even stronger, more accurate and more tougher rather than Storm Shadows and ATACMS?
So Taurus is very, very similar to the Storm Shadow, and there's a French missile called the Scalp. They all come from a similar pedigree, and the company that makes all of them is an international company from an amalgamation of all those nations. So more missiles would be a good thing. They offer very, very similar capabilities, so it would just be more of the same. We are developing more modern missiles because some of these missiles are nearly 20, 30 years old now, although we are still using them ourselves. But there are weapons coming down the line in the next 5 to 10 years that will go further, fly faster, and penetrate even deeper. So there are new things coming online, but right now it's these types of weapons, the ATACMS, HIMARS, Taurus, Scalp, and Storm Shadow that are the ones that are really at the cutting edge today.
Let's cover also the possible scenarios of Trump's presidency. What is your take and analysis of recent plans to freeze the war in Ukraine and create a demilitarized zone?
Yeah, trying to decode what Mr. Trump thinks is going to happen is challenging. And we're obviously all watching who he's picking as his key administration heads of various departments. I mean, Trump has said a few things, and he believes he can deliver peace in a very short space of time. Obviously, what everybody is worried about is the price for that peace. And I think we're all concerned that he will offer, or at least trade with Russia, a peace that is unacceptable to Ukraine. I think it's got to be realistic that whatever ceasefire is achievable, and let's be honest, we all want a ceasefire, but we want a ceasefire on the right terms. In my view, and I'm sure it's Ukraine's view, those terms are the restoration of Ukraine's sovereign territory. That is your sovereign right. Why would we not wish that? We know that Russia is probably not going to want that type of a finish, so there's an issue there to be debated. But once a ceasefire is achieved, then you are going to want to separate the warring forces in some way, shape or form to create a peaceful buffer zone. And now, ideally, that would be on the existing Ukrainian border, i.e. your sovereign border, not the one that Russia has moved into. So that will have to be part of that discussion. Who could police that and how it could be policed is a discussion for the future. But I think the key here is what conditions will Putin try and put on that border discussion. And one of the reasons he's doing these strikes is he's trying to scare people into a deal that is in his favor. And we mustn't allow that. We just must not allow that. I think what's going to be truly fascinating is if America thinks it can make a bilateral deal with Russia that Europe and Ukraine doesn't want to accept. That is where we're going to have a challenge. So the conversations that need to be happening right now between European capitals and Washington, but just as importantly, the Trump administration, are going to be key to this. Because what we don't need is Putin being able to drive a wedge between America and NATO or America and Ukraine, because he will see that as a success. And we know there are certain people in America that are more minded to take that type of a solution. So we must absolutely be strong against that.
The New York Times reported about the possible security guarantees for Ukraine. Some Biden's officials proposed to provide Ukraine with conventional weapons to deter Russia from another attack in the future. Also, another members of Biden's team proposed to provide Ukraine with nuclear warheads to deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of regret. I even heard an interview the other day with Bill Clinton, who regrets some of the agreements in Budapest that were made all those years ago as to how we've got to where we've got to. There's nothing we can do about the past. It has happened. There are some lessons to learn, but Ukraine is still in the situation it finds itself today. I think Ukraine has got to be given the wherewithal to be able to defend itself in the future, to stop something like this happening again. Now, what that entails, whether that's an increased conventional capability or even a discussion about nuclear capability, even if that maybe is a NATO type capability, yes, all of that will need to be thought through. I think there's a slightly more fundamental issue for me, and that is the potential for the idea that Ukraine can actually join NATO. Personally, I am a great fan of that. I think there's one reason why Ukraine was attacked, and that was because it wasn't in NATO. Had it been in NATO, this would not have happened. I think a lot of people in Ukraine feel like that, and a lot of people in Sweden and Finland feel like that, which is why they've recently joined NATO. People join NATO for one very good reason. They fear Russia. And they fear Russian attacks. This is not about NATO attacking Russia. I know they feel threatened, but it's absolutely not that. We're a defensive alliance, and people should be allowed to join it by their own choice. So the questions about NATO membership, about your future conventional capability, are all absolutely vital part of that future negotiation. And I do not think that Putin has the right to dictate the choices of a democratic Ukraine. It's as simple as that.
And what kind of roles the UK government could play in providing Ukraine with security guarantees?
Yes, I think that will be part of this. I think what's going to be truly fascinating over the next year is to what extent Europe steps up to be a much stronger element of NATO. You know, I don't believe that NATO is about to collapse. I do not believe that Donald Trump is going to extract America from NATO. I know you could come to that conclusion if you listen to certain voices, but I do think he wants Europe to step up and take more ownership for the defence of Europe. I think it's only fair that we do. So I think what is absolutely key here is how countries like France, UK, and Germany unite together to ensure that we have a much stronger European backbone of NATO. And then that will ensure that Ukraine has the guarantees it needs from its European allies in NATO, but without having to rely on an American guarantee. And that is the key, I think, over the next coming months. So Europe has a strong role to play here.
And my last question for you would be about the European and British defense. Former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, General Zaluzhny, who is today Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom, said that the Third World War has already begun, and he said that Europe cannot sustain full-scale conventional war for more than 3 months, for example, against Russia, and sustained such intensity of air attacks from the Russian side. Is the United Kingdom and Europe ready for such full-scale war against Russia? And what is your reaction to this?
I mean, I think the simple answer is none of us are ready for the type of war that Ukraine faces right now. One might argue Ukraine probably hoped that it wouldn't have to face it either. But the truth is that is the nature of the war that they face. And I think we all need to think through the consequences of that to the rest of Europe. Those countries closest to Russia think about that the most, understandably so. But we are all within reach. We know that. But Russia must underestimate the capability of Europe. We may be a difficult grouping sometimes to get to agree, but if we are agreed and we are united, we are a formidable force. And Putin needs to understand that, and Europe needs to make sure that is made crystal clear. We all have questions now to ask ourselves about the things that we should be doing in terms of defence and security to ensure that Putin never, ever again thinks that he can get away with doing this type of a thing. So I think I welcome the comments, particularly from your general and now ambassador. We all now need to focus very, very carefully on what we do going forward and the signals that we send. I think we all need to be a little bit careful about how we describe World War III. I think everybody has a view that World War III is some nuclear holocaust that will end up in the destruction of the world. And of course, that is a potential outcome. I think World War III is a much more difficult thing to describe. It is the types of activities that we've seen on UK soil, the use of nerve agents, the use of assassinations, the use of attacks on infrastructure, cyber attacks. All of these things, I think we are going to see an increase of. We need to ensure that we're protected from them and that we identify who they are and the perpetrators of them are punished accordingly. And I think we need Russia to understand that it cannot get away with this low-level tactic, that we will consider that as much an attack on our nations as we would a nuclear strike.
Thank you, Mr. Bagwell, for your time and for supporting Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.